Two legends, one room. A moment that was never supposed to leave those walls. What happened when Chuck Norris faced Jean-Claude Van Damme behind closed doors wasn't just a sparring match. It was a test of everything they had built their reputations on. And the witnesses? They were sworn to silence. Until now. The year was 1988. Hollywood's martial arts scene was at its peak, but beneath the surface of red carpets and box office numbers, a different world existed. A world where reputations weren't built on screen time. They were forged in private dojos, in basement training sessions, and in moments when cameras weren't rolling. Jean-Claude Van Damme was the rising storm. Bloodsport had just exploded onto the scene, turning the unknown Belgian fighter into an overnight sensation. His splits, his spinning kicks, his raw intensity, it all seemed too perfect, too choreographed. In the dojos of Los Angeles, whispers had already begun. Was he the real deal? Or was he just another Hollywood creation? It started with a phone call that most people never knew about. A private martial arts demonstration was being organized at a training facility in North Hollywood. The guest list was exclusive. High-level instructors, stunt coordinators, film choreographers, and a handful of respected fighters. The purpose? To bring together different martial arts philosophies and exchange techniques. At least, that's what the invitation said. Chuck Norris arrived early, as he always did. Dressed in a simple black gi, he moved through his warm-up routine with the mechanical precision of someone who had done it 10,000 times before. His presence commanded respect without demanding it. People naturally gave him space. Van Damme entered 20 minutes later, younger, more energetic, with that characteristic intensity in his eyes. He wore a white gi, the fabric crisp and new. As he scanned the room, you could see it in his posture. He wasn't just here to demonstrate. He was here to prove something. The two men acknowledged each other with a nod, professional, respectful. But there was something else in that brief exchange, something unspoken that everyone in the room could feel. What most people don't understand is that martial artists communicate in ways that go beyond words. A stance, a glance, the way someone moves through space. In those first few minutes, as both men warmed up on opposite sides of the room, they were already sizing each other up. Chuck's movements were economical. Every punch, every kick had purpose. No wasted motion, no flash. Just efficiency refined over 30 years of dedication. Van Damme, by contrast, was explosive. His kicks snapped through the air with audible force. His flexibility was on full display. High kicks that seemed to defy anatomy. Splits that made seasoned martial artists wince in acknowledgement. Jim Zucker, a stunt coordinator who was present that day, later recalled, "You could feel it building. Nobody was saying anything, but everybody knew something was going to happen." These were two men at the top of their game, and in that room, only one could walk away with the psychological edge. It happened during a break. Van Damme approached Chuck directly, with several witnesses nearby. The younger fighter's tone was respectful, but the intention was clear. "I've heard a lot about you," Van Damme said, his Belgian accent thick but his English clear. "People say you're the real thing. I respect that, but I'd like to see it for myself." The room went quiet. Chuck looked at him for a long moment. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply nodded once. "All right," Chuck said. "Let's see what you've got." A space was cleared in the center of the dojo. The sparse handful of spectators, no more than 15 people, formed a loose circle around the two men. There would be no referee, no formal rules, no time limit. This was going to be a pure test of skill, the kind that happens when two fighters need to know where they truly stand. Both men removed their shoes and stepped onto the mat. Chuck adopted his familiar stance, bladed, balanced, hands up but relaxed. His eyes were focused, but there was no tension in his face. He looked like a man who had been here 1,000 times before. Van Damme bounced lightly on the balls of his feet. his weight shifting fluidly from side to side. His hands were up, his guard tight. His breathing was controlled, but you could see the intensity building behind his eyes. For the first 10 seconds, neither man moved. They circled slowly, measuring distance, reading body language. This wasn't a movie. There was no choreography. Every movement from this point forward would be real. Van Damme struck first. A low kick shot toward Chuck's lead leg, fast, sharp, designed to test reaction time. Chuck shifted his weight, letting the kick glance off his shin. Before Van Damme could reset, Chuck stepped forward with a quick jab toward the body. Van Damme blocked it, but the message was clear. Distance could be closed faster than expected. They separated again, circling, breathing. Van Damme tried a different approach. He feinted high, then snapped a roundhouse kick toward Chuck's midsection. It was fast, incredibly fast, but Chuck had already read the setup. He stepped inside the arc of the kick, jamming it before it could generate power, and delivered a short elbow strike that stopped just inches from Van Damme's ribs. Control, not aggression. That was Chuck's message. The younger fighter stepped back, recalibrating. His expression shifted slightly. This wasn't going to be as straightforward as he'd anticipated. The pace picked up. Van Damme began using his flexibility and speed more aggressively. High kicks aimed at the head, not to injure, but to pressure. Spinning back kicks that forced Chuck to move and adjust. The younger man was trying to impose his style, to make Chuck fight at his tempo. But Chuck didn't take the bait. Instead of matching speed with speed, Chuck began using angles. He would shift laterally just as Van Damme committed to a kick, forcing the younger fighter to reset. He used footwork to control distance, never letting Van Damme settle into a rhythm. When Van Damme threw a combination, jab, cross, high kick, Chuck would slip the first two and check the kick with a raised knee, neutralizing the attack without expending unnecessary energy. The spectators watched in silence. What they were seeing wasn't a brawl. It was a masterclass in tactical fighting. Van Damme, to his credit, adapted. He started using feints to disguise his real intentions. A fake low kick followed by a spinning hook kick, a jab that set up a sweeping leg attack. He was fast, creative, and relentless. But there was a problem. 5 minutes in, the difference in conditioning began to show. Van Damme's explosive style, those high kicks, those full power strikes, required enormous energy. His breathing had deepened. His movements, while still fast, had lost a fraction of their crispness. Chuck, by contrast, looked almost unchanged. His breathing was steady. His stance remained solid. He hadn't thrown as many strikes, but every one of them had been precisely placed, calculated to disrupt without exhausting himself. Van Damme threw a spinning back kick, one of his signature moves. It was powerful, but Chuck saw it coming. He sidestepped, caught Van Damme's ankle mid-spin, and with a simple push and pull motion, took the younger fighter off balance. Van Damme stumbled forward, barely catching himself. The room was silent, except for the sound of breathing. They reset once more, but this time, something had shifted. Van Damme came in aggressively, trying to force an exchange. He threw a flurry of strikes, punches, a knee, and elbow, all designed to overwhelm. Chuck absorbed some on his guard, slipped others, and then, in a movement so smooth it almost looked effortless, he stepped inside Van Damme's range and executed a textbook takedown. Van Damme hit the mat hard, not violently but definitively. Before he could scramble up, Chuck was already in position, controlling the arm, his weight distributed perfectly to prevent escape. It wasn't a submission. It wasn't brutal. It was simply control. A senior instructor, who he's present later, described it this way. Chuck didn't need to hurt him. He just needed to show him that he could. And once you're in that position, everyone in the room understands what it means. Chuck held the position for 3 seconds. Then he released and stood up, offering his hand. Van Damme took it. There was no dramatic announcement, no declaration of victory. The two men stood for a moment, breathing hard, sweat dripping onto the mat. Chuck's expression was neutral, professional. Van Damme's face was harder to read. Frustration, respect, maybe both. They shook hands. A firm grip, eye contact, and then without a word, they stepped off the mat. The spectators remained quiet, not because the encounter had been violent, it hadn't been, but because they had just witnessed something rare. A genuine test between two legitimate martial artists, and a clear demonstration of who had the experience, the conditioning, and the tactical mind to control the outcome. In the days and weeks that followed, those who had been present began to process what they'd seen. None of them spoke publicly about it. This was a closed event, and there was an unspoken understanding that what happened in that room stayed in that room. But privately, the consensus was clear. Jim Zucker, the stunt coordinator, later reflected, Van Damme had all the physical tools, speed, flexibility, power, but Chuck had something you can't fake. 30 years of real competition experience. He knew how to pace himself. He knew when to engage and when to wait. That's not something you learn in 6 months. Another witness, a martial arts instructor named Robert Chan, put it more bluntly. Van Damme came in thinking he could prove himself. He left knowing he still had a lot to learn. For Van Damme, the encounter was a humbling moment. He had built his career on an image of invincibility, the ultimate fighter, the man who could do splits between 2 chairs and knock out multiple opponents in a single scene. But this was different. This was real. To his credit, Van Damme didn't publicly deny or downplay the encounter. Instead, he seemed to internalize the lesson. In interviews years later, he would occasionally mention training sessions with established legends and how much he learned from older, more experienced fighters, never naming names, but always with a tone of respect. For Chuck Norris, the encounter was simply another day. He had nothing to prove. His reputation had been built on decades of legitimate competition, not on movie roles. The private sparring match didn't change his status. It only confirmed what those in the martial arts community already knew. So why didn't this story become front-page news? The answer is simple. Both men had more to lose than to gain by making it public. For Van Damme, admitting to a loss, even in a private training session, would have damaged the carefully constructed image that Hollywood had built around him. His brand was invincibility. Any crack in that armor could hurt his career. For Chuck, there was no benefit to publicizing the encounter. He didn't need the validation, and going public would have seemed like unnecessary boasting, something that didn't align with his personal philosophy of humility and respect. So the story remained in the shadows, passed quietly between those who were there and those they trusted. This encounter wasn't just about 2 individuals. It was a microcosm of a larger truth about martial arts, one that Hollywood often obscures. Real martial arts isn't about who can kick the highest or who looks the most intimidating on camera. It's about conditioning, experience, strategy, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Chuck Norris embodied all of those qualities. Van Damme, despite his incredible physical abilities, was still learning them. The fight also highlighted a fundamental difference in training philosophy. Van Damme had trained for performance, for the camera, for the audience. Chuck had trained for competition, for the ring, where there are no second takes and no stunt doubles. What's often lost in retellings of this story is the respect both men ultimately had for each other. Van Damme never spoke ill of Chuck Norris. In fact, in later interviews, he would occasionally reference him as someone he deeply admired and from whom he learned valuable lessons. Chuck, for his part, acknowledged Van Damme's talent. "He's got the physical tools," Chuck once said in an interview. "And he works hard. That's more than you can say for a lot of people in this industry." The encounter didn't create enemies. It created mutual understanding. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Hollywood was flooded with martial arts stars, some legitimate, some manufactured. The line between real fighters and movie fighters had become increasingly blurred. Audiences couldn't always tell the difference. This private encounter between Chuck Norris and Jean-Claude Van Damme was one of many that happened during this era. Moments when the real and the performed collided. when reputations were tested away from the cameras. And for those who were there, it served as a reminder. No matter how good you look on screen, there's always someone who's been doing it longer, training harder, and fighting smarter. So what really happened when Chuck Norris faced Jean-Claude Van Damme behind closed doors? It wasn't a brutal knockout. It wasn't a Hollywood-style showdown with dramatic music and slow-motion replays. It was something more fundamental, a test of skill, endurance, and experience. And in that test, the man with 30 years of real competition experience demonstrated why legends aren't built overnight. Van Damme came into that room as a rising star, eager to prove himself against an established icon. He left with a lesson that no amount of movie roles could teach. Respect isn't given, it's earned. And experience, when combined with discipline and strategy, will almost always outlast raw talent. Chuck Norris didn't need to humiliate Van Damme to make his point. He simply needed to show him the difference between fighting for the camera and fighting for real. This story isn't just about two martial artists. It's about the difference between image and substance, between performance and mastery, between looking good and being good. In a world obsessed with appearance, where social media highlights and carefully edited clips dominate our perception of reality, the encounter between Chuck and Van Damme reminds us of a timeless truth. When the cameras are off and the real test begins, only those who have put in the work, the years of training, the discipline, the humility to keep learning, will stand tall. And that was the moment everyone in that room understood why this fight was never meant to be seen. So what do you think? Would you have wanted to be in that room? Which martial artist do you believe had the real edge, experience, or explosive talent? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed uncovering this hidden chapter of martial arts history, don't forget to like and subscribe. We've got more untold stories coming your way.